Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and joining me. Please feel free to send any questions as we go to Lisa. I think she'd already said that, and then I'll be keeping my eye on those so that I can answer them as we go, but you're more than welcome to interrupt if you need to. Let's see. There we go. I also included my contact information at the end of the presentation, but really truly feel free to email me or call me if you have any questions or want any more information about any of this. And with this kind of first content slide, you can take a look and see where you are on this scale of familiarity with the Common Core state standards. I'm sure that there are some of you who've joined us today who could really write the book on the standards. So I would take any feedback and assistance when we're done. But I also know some of you've only recently, maybe even just heard of them, and you're not particularly familiar at all. So this is going to cover a wide range of information. I took a look at some of the registration information to give you a sense of where your peers are who are also participating. So in terms of implementation, as of yesterday, about half had started it. Just more than a quarter will be implementing the standards next fall, so the fall of 2013. And then fewer than a quarter will be looking at the standards this summer, and so possibly implementing as soon as next fall, but even possibly further into the future. As far as textbook adoption, 2/3 of people had said they would like to adopt new textbooks for 2014, and one of the things that I'm curious about is how many of those of you who put that think that that's somewhat of a pipe dream. I know that where I am, that's what I would have indicated, but the likelihood that we will get anything new even in 2014 is very slim. So no, you're not the only one out there if that's the case. Of the remaining third of the people, almost all are in the process for next fall, and then very few have actually already adopted materials. And then I just took a snapshot and did a little Wordle of the things that came up as far as challenges that everyone foresees having. I just thought that was kind of an interesting way to, I have a pop-up here saying that my host has started an integrated voice conference. Do I want to participate? So.
You can just click yes. I just started off with someone who couldn't call in.
Okay, that's okay, no problem. Okay. Let's see, I need to make this go away. So thought that that would just be kind of a creative way for you to see the kinds of words that come up when the rest of us were responding to the survey that we did when we registered. And same thing here with what the experience has been like so far. I think that it's a positive thing to see so many positives there, but you'll also notice that challenging comes up. A lot of things that people said for both of these had to do with time, had to do with being able to work with colleagues, and just getting through everything that's kind of being thrown at us. So again, we're all kind of in the same boat. The first resource that I want to point out would be for any of you who have not already, to have you look at the Core Standards website that's there, and particularly the one that says in the state. And if you go to your state, you'll see the similar information. I just picked Montana since that's where I'm operating out of. But gives the information about adoption, implementation, and then that direct link to your state's page where you will find a lot of resources. And I think it's also interesting to look at the states around you and where they are in the process. So you can certainly do that on that site as well. And then also just want to address the idea that there's a big difference in my mind and for me as I went through this process between understanding the standards. I feel like I have a really good grasp on that, and then implementing them is an entirely separate challenge that I think is something we all just have to accept will go on for the next number of years. It certainly doesn't happen quickly, and so just be patient with yourself. Even if you've gotten to the point where you understand them, actually making it happen in the classroom is a totally separate step. And I created this chart here. This isn't on any actual data, but to me, this is what the process has looked like over the last year, this school year. We did a lot of work last summer, and so I feel like by July, the beginning of August, I was very familiar and had started working on utilizing everything, and then as first semester went along and I got busier and busier, it just kind of crept down. A little bit of a refreshment in my familiarity and utilization in February, and then it seems as though we get towards the end of the year that everything just kind of falls off. But what I want to say with this is that I really feel like you just have to get in there and get your hands dirty and immerse yourself in reading the standards, in playing around with them and discussing them, and continuing to go back and do that. It's kind of a cyclical process. So if I had to put into a picture how this whole thing went, that's what it would look like. And so just some suggestions. If you haven't already, I highly recommend that you get involved in your state's or district's adoption committees. And don't be afraid to seek out those opportunities. Some of them, there may not be many available because your states or your districts are far into it, but don't be afraid to call or email the people in charge of curriculum and say, hey, what help can I give you? Because I guarantee this is the fastest way to familiarize yourself with what's out there. Also meet formally, but I think even more important is informally with your colleagues, just to go over everything, talk about what's new, what's challenging, what maybe is a little scary, also what seems to be very doable. And then, and I'll talk about this a little bit more here in a bit, but rewriting the standards in your own words is sometimes helpful. And then the same thing, have your students rewrite them. They're going to have been hearing a lot about this, even especially if you've already implemented them, but I think having them understand them is really critical. And then finally, and I'll show you these resources, but utilize a database or program that will tie the standards to your lesson plans. One example would be your state's website, and I just picked Pennsylvania, so those of you out there from Pennsylvania, you probably have seen this before. But I want to point out that on most sites, they're going to have something along the lines of a set of resources already selected for you. They're one of the best tools that I've found, and don't be afraid to visit other states' websites too, because some of you are from states that have great information. Montana has done a nice job, but some of you may be from states that don't offer that much, and because they are common across the country, other states are going to have information that will help you regardless of where you are. As far as meeting with colleagues, I would just pick one area to explore at a time, such as reading informational text or speaking and listening. Don't try to take on too much at once. And also look at the national Common Core state standards as well as those adopted by your state or district. There will possibly be some subtle differences, and I think it's not a bad idea just to be aware of those. And then as part of that, find out if your state has added its own 15% to the standards. This is something that all states have the option to do. I tried to find a little information about other places and found in a lot of places it was vague. For instance, the state of California, I know that those of you there, the state did add its own, but it didn't give any specifics that I could find easily anyway about what those were. In the state of Montana, our state has added 15% of what we call Indian Education for All. It's part of our state constitution that we teach about the history and culture of our American Indians, and so that's the percentage that they chose to add. As far as rewriting the standards goes, first of all, do this merely as an exercise. You'll find that you're not actually allowed to use your own versions from, say what the state has given to you, but I think it's a really good exercise to help understand them. I would also, for your classrooms or if you are working with other teachers, create your own outline of what you need to cover and post it somewhere, or create an outline and give it to your teachers. That might be a little less daunting and might help them process through what they need to go over at a glance, as opposed to, for instance, again, in my own district, we have the black binder that has pages and pages and pages and pages. It's great when I need details, but if I want at a snapshot to see what I've covered, it's very overwhelming. So that would be another way to process through them. And then again, just having students look at the standards by having them rewrite those. And if they're familiar with previous versions, ours would not have been, but if your students are very familiar, it might even be a good idea to have them compare and contrast the two. Another way to familiarize yourself and also then verify what you're covering is to use databases. This one comes from EdSeek, and it just has all of them organized by grade, by standard. You can see up here that it shows all grade levels. So I think that this would be very helpful. And the other reason I recommend this is because it will prove to you that you're actually doing a lot of the things that you're supposed to be doing for the Common Core. You're already doing that, and I think that takes away a lot of the overwhelming factor. Another great tool that I don't know how aware people are, but figured it was worth including here. Mastery Connect has created this Common Core app, and it is available for Android devices free as well as for the iPad, and through both platforms stores, and again it's free, and it just lists them. It doesn't, the free app doesn't provide any way to interact with them, but it's still a great place to go and take a look at them in a pinch. And then the thing that I've found to be the most useful is the use of Schoology's learning management system. And I don't know if Edmodo would be similar to Edmodo. I don't know if other products have included this information. But in using Schoology, I can, when I create an assignment, align not just the Common Core standards, but if you look at the document here, they've actually included Montana's in there. So it's just not the national standards, it's specific to Montana. And as I go through, I can select the standards and then click the Add Alignments button. And then on this next slide, you will be able to see how it ends up appearing. So when I have, and I just created this, literally created the sample assignment for this, but when I have the assignment, it shows me, again at a glance, what standards I'm covering, but then also gives me up here the actual standard itself written out. And this has shown me it's really pretty cool when you create an assignment and you find out that it covers 4, 5, 10 different standards, and you wouldn't have had the sense of how much you were incorporating if you didn't have this tool to look at it all in one place. You might be encountering some, I didn't mean to add that arrow, sorry. You might be encountering some resistance to the standards from a variety of places, and I won't go too much into this, but if nothing else, I wanted to point these out so that you know you're not the only one. So here's just a brief list of places that they may come up. First thing, this had not dawned on me. I know it seems obvious probably to a lot of people, but I didn't understand the pushback from, say, the public. It's why they were so, some people, I should say, so against this. And somebody said, well, it's the idea that they're common, that they're simple, that we're going to reduce what kids need to learn down to just the basics. And I kind of chuckled. I think part of why I hadn't realized that issue was that, to me, they're anything but common. So especially for those of you who aren't very familiar, I've pulled Writing Standard 7 from across 4 grades so that you can see that in kindergarten, so the orange, it's going to be a number later on for a grade, but this tells you the grade level, and then I just highlighted in orange or put in orange the primary thing that the students need to do. But so that you can see how it progresses across the grades. I don't know, I have not taught kindergarten, and I think kindergarten teachers are amazing for what they do, but if my students were capable of participating in shared research and writing projects at a suitable level by the time they reach sophomore year, I'd be pleased, let alone at the kindergarten level. So that, to me, is pretty impressive. And then here is what it looks like in the 4th grade. Same standard in the 8th grade. I mean, short research projects are something that, again, a lot of our sophomores wouldn't have taken on, let alone at the 4th grade or even the 8th grade level. And then here's where it is at the 12th grade level. Taking a look at another one, for reading informational texts, here's where it is at the kindergarten level. And again, yes, with prompting and support, but you probably have students in your class now who wouldn't ask and answer questions about key details if you didn't prompt and support them. Here's the 4th grade level. I think that getting into explicit statements and drawing inferences at this grade is pretty powerful. Here's 8th grade. Not a lot different. We're just getting into citing information, and then finally 12th grade. Another place that I suggest that you take a look for information, and maybe some of it is even your own doubts about the Common Core. I guess I've bought into it because I don't know that we would have had a lot of choice anyway, and I think a lot of what it has is really exceptional. But there are some good questions on the myths and facts page that I appreciated reading about and that you probably would as well. And then you would also have information for your colleagues, your administrators, parents, students, etc. So these are some of the myths that relate directly to English language arts. The idea that, and one of the others I'm going to pull up here has to do with informational text, but it doesn't have enough emphasis on fiction and literature. There's still plenty of room for that in the standards. Another is that we're asked to teach science and social studies reading materials, and that comes again with that informational text. But I like to turn this one on its head and say that we will finally get some assistance from across the board, from science, social studies, health enhancement, math, in teaching how to read informational text. And so I see it more as, hey, I'm happy to have the students become better readers if I can work with some quality informational text, even if they have to do with science, but I also like the idea that they'll be covering it in science class as well. That they amount to a national curriculum. There's so much flexibility and variation, and it's still so locally controlled that, and it goes into a greater explanation, but I can guarantee that all of us would be teaching different things in our classrooms even once we've completely integrated them. And then finally, the one that comes up a lot is that the standards have suggested we teach Grapes of Wrath to second graders, which those of you who've taught it know would never work. Of course, the language, the sentence structure is pretty basic, but when you look at text complexity, which we'll take a look at actually later, it's pretty easy to see that that would never be an appropriate placement. So it provides a brief explanation of that as well. And then I'll go through these pretty quickly so we can get on to the other stuff. But you can assure your colleagues they're already doing a lot of this in their classrooms, and the same goes for any of us. That they're relevant, important, and they'll serve the students. And finally, I really like what they've offered to our school for vertical structure and horizontal structure across content areas and within content areas. I think an important thing are student attitudes. They really have taken the lead from their teachers and the leaders in the schools, so if we present it positively, they will accept it a little better. Reminding them we're getting them ready for their next step beyond high school. And the addition of clarity and consistency to what's expected of them, not just within a school, but across schools, across states. Competitiveness, oh, sorry, I went too fast past that one. And then competitiveness, their competitiveness on the national level and even internationally, that they are seeking college spots with students who've had the same preparation, that we're increasing the rigor for students in the United States who are competing with those from elsewhere, and that, in the end, it just ends up with them having a better education. One question that frequently comes up is the loss of independence as a teacher of English language arts. I have not seen this to be the case in my own experience. It's going to depend a lot on how your states and districts handle it, but it certainly isn't something that has to happen. So here are some of the reasons why you won't lose that independence. These are speaking about the flexibility of the standards, that we still have local control, there's still plenty of room for ownership, etc. The increased justifications for materials is great. The fact that we have to do text complexity, and then if you have a question from a parent or even an administrator, why are you teaching this piece of literature, we can back it up in a way that we may not have been able to before or been able to take the time to before. So quick summary of this first section, and then we'll get into kind of the meat of argumentative writing and presentations. I'm going to start with the cons of the Common Core state standards and then end on the positive notes. But they're very challenging. One thing that I read said that we may lose teachers and administrators purely because they won't want to take this challenge on. It will cause all of us to stop and reflect about what we teach and how we teach in ways that we may not have for a long time, if ever. Another one is the challenging pace, especially for our younger students. I think that elementary school teachers will see this the most. We'll see the benefits of it when they finally reach us, but it's one of the things that for the first few years will be a challenge. There will be variations in how quickly we've adjusted or adapted and how schools do. I think in the long run this will smooth itself out. And then, of course, the idea that in a perfect world we would have adjustments to our textbook and reading materials. A lot of us, again, are going to be in the situation where we don't get new materials and we're just kind of making do as we can. But then again, maybe it's a pro because it'll push along the adoption of new materials faster than it would have happened otherwise. The standards definitely require technology, and so for a lot of places it will be new or at least newer technology. And it will reassert the importance of standardized tests. Whether we like that or not is kind of a separate issue because they will be there. The pros, however, again, the consistency. This is within a building from one teacher to the next, but also across the state and across the country. Clarity in terms of what we're actually supposed to teach. They are vague in the sense that you can teach the standards in a lot of different ways, but at least we know clearly what we are supposed to cover. I've seen such an increase in collaboration at my school in ways that in the 11 years I've been here has never happened, and that's been a definite positive. And it also gives us comparisons across students, across programs, across teachers, curriculum that means we really are comparing apples to apples. I guess one thing with the way that it's been in the past that has always been frustrating is, for instance, with our state assessment, it didn't really assess the students where they were. There was no way that they could be prepared for the assessment that they were given because we weren't comparing curriculum that we had to teach our students. That wasn't being compared to how they were being assessed. And so whether it's assessments or whether it's even just looking at individual students, at least we're talking about the same thing at this point. And savings on curriculum and test development in the long run. And it, of course, increases rigor and higher level thinking skills. And then finally, powerful student data we can use and an improvement in international competitiveness. And I'll continue on to the next bit, but this would also be a good place if there are any general questions, because then I'm going to get into the specifics of these special considerations: text complexity, multimedia, argumentative. Also, go ahead. I was going to say, Lisa, this might be a good place if you want to talk about, because I apologize for skipping that earlier, but materials that you would recommend or that Bedford has.
Actually, the questions that have come in so far are more specific about the topics that you'll address, so I'll save them until you get to each of those individual topics.
Okay.
If that's okay. And
yeah.
I can just tack my stuff on the end about some of the Bedford resources that we would like people to know about. So I'll just pepper the questions in as we go along, if that's okay.
Okay, sounds good. So the first thing I'm going to take on is text complexity, and I pulled this logo directly from the Common Core website because it illustrates well what we're dealing with. So the 3 levels of text complexity, or 3 areas of, the top 2, qualitative and quantitative, are based just on the text, so they don't take into account the person reading the text or what that individual is going to be doing with it. And then the bottom one is, of course, based on the reader and the task, and we'll go into these in a little bit more depth here in a second. So the qualitative is everything that, even though it doesn't have anything to do with the reader and the task, only a reader and a task would be able to assess. So for instance, a computer can't assess these aspects. So the levels of meaning, purpose, you can see it in the box there, the structure of it, the quality of the language, not just the quantity, for instance, and then the knowledge demands in terms of what the reader needs to have when approaching the text itself and then the task. Whereas the quantitative is everything that can be assessed without taking the reader into consideration or without the reader even being there. So this is going to be the number of words, the length of the sentences, how easily the text comes together. And then the final one is the one that's going to vary the most for the same piece of text. So the reader's motivation, knowledge, and experience, and as well as the task, complexity, and purpose. So this will vary by reader as well as by teacher, assignment, etc. So this is kind of the idea, I guess this just popped into my mind, so it may not make sense, but Disney movies often have multiple layers of meaning, and if you think about it in terms of this triangle, a 6-year-old is going to get a totally different level of meaning out of any given Disney movie than an adult would, and is maybe even going to be a little bit more motivated than some adults would be. But you can see how the reader and task aspect changes even if the qualitative and the quantitative aspects don't change. Here is, and I chose this in part because it's the one that comes up a lot in discussion, but here's what a write-up looks like, and I'll bring this back in again later, or we can go back and look at it. But you've got the elements of the qualitative measures, and this is a chart that can be created in any number of ways, but is a good way to assess text complexity. You have your quantitative measures, and again, I'll go into more detail with these, and then you get into your reader task, so this is the bottom part of the triangle, and finally is the recommended placement. I've actually kind of enjoyed looking at text complexity because it gives me as a teacher an opportunity to analyze literature in a way that I maybe haven't gotten to do for quite a while. And I teach it, but it isn't like I often get to sit down and just think about literature in this objective manner, and it's the English teacher nerd in me, I suppose, but I find it to be a little bit enjoyable. So as we're looking at these different levels, first for qualitative would be the levels of meaning, which is the fictional version, or if you're looking at informational text, it would be the purpose of it. So these are the aspects that you would consider. Again, there's the single level of the literal journey in Grapes of Wrath, but there are the many, many underlying multiple levels. And then there's also explicit versus implicit purpose, and an illustration of that, think of famous speeches and all of the things that are being said on the surface level, but also all of the argumentative, persuasive aspects that the person is covering, and that gives you a sense of how you might look at levels of meaning in an informational text. Things to consider with the structure. I guess what comes to mind would be, a lot of the stories that we teach when students are younger are fairly straightforward with a simple structure beginning to end, and they get more complex. So the circular story in aspect of Mice and Men, or even with Grapes of Wrath, those chapters in between the contrapunctal chapters that talk about the turtle. That adds complexity to Grapes of Wrath that certainly isn't in the language or in the sentence structure. Again, you'll see explicit versus implicit a lot. Is it a conventional story or unconventional? Is it a frame story that gets, again, back up into structure? Do you have multiple narrators that jump around kind of in an as I lay dying sort of text? Pretty self-explanatory there and there. This is going to be more, I would say, informational, but are the graphics supplementary? Do you get a lot out of the graphics if you're the reader of the text, or are they really essential and complex? So for instance, if you're looking at a chart that's difficult to read, or a reporting of information that if you don't understand how it's presented in the graphic, if you're the student, you're not going to understand the rest of the text very well. And then still in qualitative, looking at language, and again, these will be pretty straightforward for all of you. I think this third one is important to consider. Again, Huckleberry Finn, the story itself isn't too complex, but once we add in the slightly more archaic vernacular language, it boosts up the text complexity. And this conversational could also be casual, or is it very technical, or again, specifically academic. And that's, again, in your informational text, you'll see increasingly more of the technical and the academic than you might even in the fictional texts. Knowledge demands, again, pretty specific to the reader, but fairly straightforward. Again, cultural and literary knowledge, if I were to take, well, even for our students here in Montana, but one of the books that we teach is called Fool's Crow, and even for those students, it's a huge jump in cultural knowledge, but it would particularly be so for students who live elsewhere in the country that there's very little knowledge of on a general basis of American Indian history. Fairly straightforward again. Oh, the intertextuality gets into things like allusions. Do they have to have read or be familiar with biblical passages in order to understand the allusions would be an example as far as intertextuality. And then the quantitative, this is probably the simplest to assess because you're going elsewhere to find this information. It includes such programs and systems as, and I just picked these 4 because I figured they're the ones that would be most familiar to all of you. So again, these are things that you're going to look up and not have to actually assess yourself, but you would add it to your text complexity write-up. The other thing is, depending on the level and how important your write-up is or the justification for it, rather than just relying on, say, the Lexile level, you'd want to do a combination of these. 2 would oftentimes be sufficient, but 3 if it's really questionable, for instance. And then I found this that shows the Common Core band here, but then also takes what the level would be, and this was in one of the comments. I apologize that I don't have exactly where it came from. It was in one of the core standards documents, but I really liked this, and can maybe try to make it available somewhere else too, because I hadn't seen much that showed everything across the board. Because you will have some that say the Lexile framework is in this 4th to 5th band, but your ATOS score might actually be up in this one. And so then you kind of have to have a discussion about where it best belongs. And I don't know, I had to kind of chuckle about this, the reader and the task, that it's the most difficult and subjective. Obviously the course level, if you're teaching an honors course, the individual student's needs within that course, because you know that the abilities of the reader and even how they approach the task will vary. And then I imagine that a lot of you are similar to me in that it would just depend on the day, the week, or the year as to where that would go. So that's going to vary quite a bit. But this comes directly from the standards. These are all determined locally. You can look at your own students' motivation, knowledge, and experiences, especially when it comes to life experiences and how that would relate. So again, if it's a book that takes place in the Deep South, my students up here in Montana would probably need a lot more background information and knowledge. And I'm just looking here. I have a note. Oh, about text complexity and does the teacher have to evaluate it? Well, I would say that depends. In my district, a group of us got together to assign text complexity, and that is what told us what we'd be teaching at each level. And so we restructured our entire curriculum based on this text complexity. Now, not every teacher was involved in having to write them, but we were all affected by it. So I figure that it's probably useful for all of us, because that way if you get a book that you think as a classroom teacher is way off, this would give you a way to assess it and either go back to the people that you are working with and say, was this assessed for text complexity? But it also gives you a sense, those of you who might be on these committees this summer or next fall, of kind of the process. this was the whole text complexity idea in my sense, and others of you may know otherwise, but this was a big shift and change in terms of why we teach what we teach, and we had to completely drop some things out of our curriculum as a result, and we also added new things. So it did have quite an effect. So as kind of the summary on text complexity, you can see that you get these three things together. The qualitative, again, that's what has to be assessed by a human reader or takes into account the human reader. The quantitative, which is really more the numerical data, and then finally who the individual reader is and the task that is being asked of him or her, and that all equals the recommended placement. It's not hard and fast, but it's kind of where a group would end up deciding was the best spot. And then I created this, and this isn't anything fancy, but if you were to look at text complexity with a group, or if you just wanted to assess your own, I'd suggest coming up with a graphic organizer somewhat similar to this, because it gives you a spot to articulate all of the information that you need. And then in the end, of course, the recommended placement would be kind of a write-up and a justification. It's not necessarily just saying this would be great at the 9th grade level. It's also saying here's why we think it is. It's a summary, I guess, of everything else. So I'm going to take a look here and just see if I have any more questions on text complexity. Or let me know, Lisa, if we have any before I move on. Okay, taking a look at the argumentative essay. And before I start into this, I'm just going to say that even in my relatively small department, we have had, well, I teach in a school with 1,800 kids, so I guess it isn't that small. But we've had so many discussions about what an argumentative essay is versus a persuasive essay. And it tends to get a little bit complex, and people are pretty opinionated about it. So tread lightly in your discussions about this. I'm going to give you my sense of it. You certainly, if you disagree with me, you can, you don't need to tread lightly with me, but you may have some colleagues who get really stuck on some of the definitions, and it can create a lot of consternation. And I would even say that you'll find in your textbooks that you have. For instance, we have adopted one just for our junior students, since they're the ones who will be taking the assessment here in a couple of years. So that's what our district decided to adopt. It's the only new textbook we have, and it doesn't even differentiate argumentative essays from persuasive essays. It talks about them interchangeably in one chapter, and that just really muddied the water for a lot of our teachers and then also for the students. So just kind of with that little bit before I launch into it. So the first thing that I would do is assess your own comfort with it and utilize your resources. We had a couple teachers here who mistakenly assumed that it was just like the persuasive essay that they had always taught, and when they got into it realized that the 2 days they set aside to teach the argumentative essay were not nearly enough. I would also explore the differences, and I put carefully just because, again, people really vary on their opinions about that. And then find resources that differentiate between the two and kind of stick to those. And then I would start with persuasive writing because that's what most students are going to be familiar with. Some of you will have been teaching argumentative. Obviously, those of you who teach AP language, for instance, you're very familiar with the differences than your students would be, but I'm going to say that that's probably the exception. It may not be, but I guess I would go into this assuming that's the exception. Here's the Common Core's statement on argument, and I'm certainly not going to read through this with you or to you, but I did highlight the difference between persuasive and logical arguments according to the Common Core, and if nothing else, this is a great place to go back to. And you can certainly look this up. I won't stay too long on this, but it's on the Common Core website. Start very small, and I really, for my students especially, simplify the differences between a persuasive essay and an argumentative essay. And this is the approach or the view that we took at my school. I just made sure my students knew that argumentative essays always have counterclaims and address the opposing viewpoint. Persuasive essays sometimes include them. They may or may not. And then the second thing is the idea that argumentative essays are based primarily on logic and evidence, less on emotional and ethical, whereas the other essays, persuasive, and I mean certainly you'll see comparisons of that with propaganda, the far extreme on the other side, but really relying on emotional and ethical. So that was where we started. If we could get our students to understand this, we felt like we'd gotten a good start because it was so new. I have a question about the model that I use when teaching it. I guess I'm going to say if I can get a clarification on that in terms of, I mean, I've looked like at Tulamon and tried to have my students understand that, but that was way over their heads at this point. So I'll show maybe some of the steps I think I've included in this that might help, but if that's the kind of model you're getting at, I don't have one to recommend at this point. This is new enough, and to our students, this was a completely new type of writing. It's just nothing we'd ever included before. So I'll kind of give you some tips, but it certainly is not as advanced as getting to a model at this point. Another tool that we used, again, this is with students who are just starting this process, and I should say, not just but teachers who are starting this. This comes from Smeakin's Education Solutions, and they say there's a link right on their site, share this with people, so I've included it here, but if you Googled Smeakin's and just looked for their argumentative materials, you would come up with this. What we have on the, and I guess I cut it off a little bit, what we have on the left is a persuasive essay on animal testing, and on the right is an argumentative essay, and they have actually color-coded the elements that make it a persuasive essay. And again, for our teachers and our students, this relatively simple tool was very, very helpful, so I highly recommend it.
Kate, I have a clarification here from Kamel on his
Okay,
question.
perfect.
Do you have one you use in your classroom to teach argumentative and or persuasive, a model?
And again, when we're talking models, are we talking something like a Tulamon model or my own personal model?
He says yes.
Yes. I'll be completely honest. I don't have a set one yet. This year, so this isn't going to be the greatest answer, but this year we pulled materials from so many different places, and we also agreed across our 11th and 12th grade classes to teach one unit to all of the students and then have them do a formative assessment. And so we're really still in the shaping and forming state of how we want to do this. So if anyone has any recommendations, that would be great. We relied on our textbook, which is a Holt textbook. It's just what our district has. And I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying that it didn't have everything we needed. But at this point, I don't really have one I can recommend with a lot of knowledge, and I would also take suggestions. So again, that's not the best answer, and I apologize, but.
No, that's great. And actually, I'm sure that people will have some suggestions maybe that they can share. Got a lot of questions coming in. I have one from Margaret, who says, she wants to know, is the persuasive essay more like the informational or expository essay?
Oh, great question. I'm going to say it would completely depend on how you teach it. And this is the whole crux of this discussion. You could easily teach it as more of an informational explanatory. And I think that what we've done in the past as kind of the basic essay, that's where it would fit. I think this is a little bit like, I don't just think, that's how I would explain it. It's kind of like the rectangle square aspect in that a persuasive essay can be more argumentative, but it isn't usually an argumentative, whereas an argumentative essay is a persuasive essay, if that makes sense. An argumentative essay has all of the aspects that are required for a persuasive, but persuasive doesn't have all of those for an argumentative. So I would say more often than not, it probably fit better in the informative explanatory. Any other questions at this juncture?
Just one here is argumentative essay based on textual evidence. Question from Edward.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll get here in a second to some of the places that our students got hung up, and that's one of them was incorporating that. But as a quite general rule, yes, that is the case.
And then the only other thing I have here are some really some suggestions from people about the last topic, which I'll include at the end, which are very helpful, and some suggestions for other resources, which I'll also include at the end. The only other one that just came in, someone wants to know, if the argumentative essays are always persuasive, why do we spend time differentiating between the two?
I think, and as I'm looking at it, I think it's just to focus on the logic of it and have students understand how important logic is and how that thought process is important. And I'm kind of looking at some of the notes that are coming through here as well. And as someone's pointing out, you know, the ideas can be interchangeable, but they're not always. And I would say that that's absolutely true. To be honest, I'm not sure why so much time spent on differentiating. I would like to see some additional clarification on that, not because I necessarily need it. I'm happy to spend the time as a teacher with my students differentiating it, but I feel like it's so muddied, and I don't blame Common Core for that. I think they've been very straightforward on their approach, but there are people who would greatly disagree on the approach that they've taken. And so, again, if any of you have any and I'm not like an AP Lang teacher, so my knowledge in this has grown quite a bit recently, and I know there are those of you out there who know a lot more about it than I do. I just kind of approached it from a, hey, this was a new concept that our students certainly weren't familiar with, and I wasn't as familiar with as a lot of the other stuff that I teach. And I'm getting some comments about a good argument including all 3 levels of appeals. From what I've found, they can include all 3, but they really, again, this is just in my research, they really don't include much beyond logic. It's hard to differentiate, so it's not always easy to pull anything, pull everything out that isn't logical, but they don't stand on anything but logic, and then the rest of it is just kind of supplementary. Again, that's my interpretation, but the textbook we have discusses them interchangeably and makes no distinction between them. So I think some of that is going to just be how you want to approach it in your classroom. And I think this is going to be one of those things that, hey, here's that place for taking ownership over what you teach and kind of your personal perspective on it. And I do agree that getting into it too much takes a lot of time. I have a colleague who's gotten into quite good, I'm going to say, argumentative discussions with her husband. He teaches argument at the college level and vastly disagrees with what we've been given here and how we're teaching it. And at some point, I think that it does tend to muddy it so much that it defeats the whole point. But I'm going to let you guys, I'm reading your comments, and I'm going to let you continue to comment on that while I move forward. And not that I'm ignoring anything. If nothing else, I'm just enjoying the great discussion about it. But I'll move on in the meantime. This is a great chart that Read, Write, Think put out. I think it keeps it fairly simple. So to answer some of your questions, this might be a good resource to use with students. And obviously those of you teaching higher level, especially like the AP language courses, you're going to get into this a lot more with your students at that level. If we're talking just, say, 9th graders or even younger students, I think it's important to keep it as simple as possible. So here are some of the stumbling blocks that we came up against, and I prepared this, certainly before we got here, but the biggest one is differentiating between the two, and I guess I feel you can kind of decide on your own how much you even want to do that with your students. Incorporating in-text citations, both the idea of needing to have them, but also how to incorporate them is something we continue to struggle with at all levels, despite how much we've gone over it again and again. The idea with argumentative that you do need to include evidence and there should be quotes, and I guess I'm differentiating in-text citations being the literal parenthetical versus the quote. We have students who include quotes but don't have the in-text citations, so I treat those as 2 separate items. We also had a lot of students who included a lot more evidence and quotes than their own thoughts, and I'm sure you've run into that too, but I guess as you're setting this up and scaffolding it for them, really encourage them to consider feeling free to infuse their own thoughts into it and not relying too much on just giving you the evidence and the quotes, not over-quoting. The other thing, it was fascinating. I would so clearly say to my students, the number one thing you have to do on this is take a stand. That's one of the cornerstones of your essay, but they still struggled. They wanted to do we did an assignment on social networking, and the number of kids who said social networking is good for many reasons and social networking is bad for many reasons, and then went on explaining both. And then again, the idea of addressing counterclaims. Many of them talked just about their side of it, so it was almost the opposite of the previous bullet point. So some suggestions for those of you just starting. I would suggest limiting the materials that you give them to find the information. Websites such as procon.org provide ample information, and that way you can keep it focused on how to structure ideas and not have them be kind of overwhelmed with where should I go, or you being overwhelmed with how to keep them focused on reliable quality materials. I would really work heavy on the front end of this, and you can certainly find many different resources that graphic organizers that will help you outline and help students pre-write. So again, I would recommend that. This would be a great essay to do a multiple draft approach. Have them, do their initial draft, do some self-editing, do some peer editing, and then finally hand in a final draft to you, and even providing checklists. Did the person include a counterclaim? Are there in-text citations? It's just a fairly technical essay that I think that will save you a lot of headache when you finally get the product in the end, and then you can help them throughout the process. Oh, is this
website is?
Which website? I'm going to flip back through a second.
Yeah.
This, I have the Smeekins, and then this one is the Read, Write, Think website.
I think that's the one. Thank you.
Yes. No, that's not the one. This one? Well, feel free to at some point clarify. Oh, where the students get their information. Procon, as in pros and cons.org was the website. It presents information, literally just that, the pros of an issue, and they're all kind of hot topic issues of today, and also includes information on how to cite it. Okay, let's see. Yeah, you bet. And again, this is generic, but the idea of modeling and scaffolding the skills. So you might take a topic as part of teaching students and go through it, show them how you would outline it, how you would structure and build in your counterclaims. So I guess I can't express enough how important or useful it would be for you to actually go through the process with, a different prompt, a different topic, and walk them through it. And this one, again, I think this is something, and you know your students and you know how new this is, but if your students have been writing argumentative essays or even persuasive essays quite a bit, you won't need as much. But this was just such a new concept for our kids that I think we could have spent weeks on it. We ended up only spending about 1.5 in terms of introducing it, and it could easily, I know some of you have probably taken or taught an entire semester's worth of argumentative writing and speaking, and so it could certainly use more time than we're ever going to be able to give it. And then there's so much great stuff out there on the internet, and I'm going to put up here another website that I found that brings a lot of that together, but Google is a great tool for you as the teacher. I guess I wouldn't suggest it as much for the kids to find their information because they'll be everywhere, but for you it's fabulous. The other thing is I put this, have fun with it. I saw some great examples. One was on looking at argument in Princess Bride. So you certainly don't have to have it even be really controversial topics. Another one was looking at, commercials for the Chevy Volt. You can certainly mix it up and have it be hot topics for the kids today, and then also things that you don't mind reading about, so you're not reading essay after essay after essay about, something really dry and boring. So here I've put together a lot of the resources that I used in a live binder. And there's the URL for it. I'm not sure of the best way. I included the URL. It's also hyperlinked, so if you look at the PowerPoint, you could click directly on it. But the best of all of the sources is the one that you're seeing here in the screenshot, this Utah Education Network. And some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it, but this one, if you just even Googled Utah Education Network Argumentative Writing, this is just a screenshot of the top half of it, but some of the best materials that I got came from this website out of Utah, as well as I'd even found a lot of these resources on my own, but gosh, it would have been easier if I'd just gone directly to this one. So I wanted to include that. If for some reason the live binder link doesn't work when you go to it, don't hesitate to send me an email. I'm quite certain I have it shared publicly, and I think you could even add to it, which I would welcome. But this is one of the best resources that I found, and it has everything from, basic younger grade stuff, like here's student writing samples. This might even have been pulled from the core standards, but here it is all in one place with kindergarten. This even had, here's Tulemon model of argumentation, so it's kind of every level that you could ever want. Let me back up a second. Any other questions at this point before I get to the multimedia presentation?
No, nothing coming in
okay.
Right now. Just some
Perfect.
other suggestions for resources, which I'll share at the end. Okay.
And I have, this is the last kind of, it's not even that big, but on multimedia, and so I think time-wise we're right on. I don't know about you, but I obviously did this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but the challenges of the multimedia for us have been access to the technology, literally to the machines and the computers, and we're in really pretty good shape at the high school that I teach at, and then just needing time. So, like I said, tongue-in-cheek, but these seem to be the biggest challenges. And yes, I would be happy to, on any of this, I'll email information, and I think what I'll even do is put together an email that just has all of the links that I would recommend and or that I talked about, and then you can certainly, ask questions or email me back about any of them. I'm going to bring up the learning curve again, because I think that everything seems great when we're working on this and planning in the summer, and then as the year goes on, we get bogged down in all of the stuff that is our job in working with students. So I guess I include this: be gentle with yourself and patient with yourself and your students. Some suggestions: if you're lucky enough to have a technology integration specialist, don't be afraid to use him or her, and don't be afraid to ask your administrators and leaders and district for more resources, for more technology. The worst thing they can say is no. But I'm one of those that I work really pretty independently, and it was tough for me to rely on one of my colleagues to do what I figured I should be able to do, namely teach how to do a presentation. And I certainly am capable of that, but that's what she's there for. That's what she gets paid to do. And it meant that I could really focus on the quality of what the students' work was coming in, and she could focus on how to get them to producing that. So I guess just for all of those of you out there who are independent like me, sometimes we have to rely on other people, and this would be a great time to do it. Again, start small. I put just this simple inclusion of what multimedia is. So if this is all you're comfortable with and all your students are comfortable with, just starting with including a video or doing a navigational structure, telling a story with technology is certainly sufficient. When it comes to time, I have probably about 125 students at any given point, and so having every single one of those students do a presentation for the class is just not possible on a regular basis. But if you have them work at least in pairs, it halves that, or in groups, and I think that is perfectly acceptable. And then it also gives the students some comfort in working with each other, takes out some of those presentation jitters, etc. But I guess for some people at first I think this seems like it's cheating the system a little bit, and it absolutely isn't. The other thing is adults, we often get to present in pairs or in groups, so we're not taking anything away from the student's experience. And I can't emphasize this enough. Again, kind of be gentle with yourself as you break into it, but don't be afraid to stretch yourself and make mistakes and to learn new things. And I really feel in working with kids that just taking them through the process of creating the presentation taught them even more than they got out of what they were covering or than they produced as the final product. I think you will find, if you haven't already, and most of you probably have, that they're not as familiar with this technology as we might assume they are. So teaching them how to use PowerPoint, and I'll show you some other methods here in a second, is probably some of the best stuff we can give them. So here's some questions to ask yourself and, of yourself and of your students. How comfortable are you with whatever presentation software you choose? Will the students have reliable internet access for the creation of them? I think you have to know the answer to this question before you can even begin. If not, you're looking pretty much at things like PowerPoint. If they will have access, the world is available to you. But then will you also have reliable internet access for the presentations? A lot of the software that I'll show you, you're able to download, and you don't need the internet to do the presentation, but a lot of it is stored in the cloud, and you would have to have that as well. And then do they have the software and or internet access at home? This is one of those things we just may not be able to rely on students doing outside of class. It has to happen in class for a lot of kids. They might have basic word processing, but they don't necessarily have the internet, for instance. And then how much time can you devote to it? And I think this is one of the biggest challenges. But again, start small. And then finally, do you have, it's going to be pretty tough for you to incorporate this now common standard if you don't have the hardware that you need, if you don't have a projector. So again, if this stuff doesn't exist in your room or at least in your building, you need to go and be assertive. Don't be afraid to ask for it. It's now a requirement of you and of the students. So quickly, just some answers and to go back over it. Start small, keep it simple. Less formal is perfectly acceptable as a starting place. I would say use the online platforms only if you know you'll have reliable internet access. Otherwise, it creates chaos for everybody and it makes it miserable. And practice using it yourself. Do a couple lesson plans with it. Teach the students some things using Prezi, for instance. We already kind of covered that. Oh, this one's great. Though the students aren't as knowledgeable as I would hope that they would be, at the same time, they love helping me out when I'm not sure how to do things, or if we're in the Mac lab, say, and I'm more familiar with the PCs. So rely on them to help you, but they'll also be great resources for each other. So encourage that, I guess. And with this one, if you're comfortable with trying something new and not just going with PowerPoint, you'll be rewarded with better results. It will be worth it in the end, and I'll give you an example here in a second. So here are some of the things you can try. You're probably familiar with Google Docs. Prezi is my personal favorite. SlideRocket, Impressor, Animoto, and there are many others. Let me actually go back to that really quickly so you can take a look. I know we're getting close to the end. I'm trying not to rush, but I'm very close to the end of the presentation. So here's just some screenshots of what two students of mine did with Prezi. They'd had almost no background knowledge in how to use it. They got just the basics from our integration specialist, and they took off from there. So the use of photos is very easy, and then Prezi is the one that you zoom in and out of. One of the side effects of Prezi can be the feeling of car sickness, so you might have to talk with the kids about that, but if they're careful in how they transition, it makes awesome presentations. So started with, I'm going to actually back up again, her overview was of the causes of the Great Depression and how that led to World War II, or the Great Depression and how it led to World War II. You can see little tiny things like here. I'm going to point one out. There's one here, and these are things that the students have embedded into the presentation that it zooms into and out of as it goes. So here's one way that it zoomed in. She was looking at, or the two students were looking at what caused the Great Depression. And so they went from here to, money obviously being, and then you'll notice that it's going to zoom in on this statement down here. And it just takes what would otherwise be pretty plain and boring and makes it amazing without the students having to have a whole bunch of skills, it just prevents that ongoing boring PowerPoint that every student looks the same as the next. And I just simply had, if I go back, I don't know if we'll be able to see it in any of them, but in order to give credit to photos, for instance, because I try to teach them to always incorporate and give credit to those things and have that just be the standard mantra, they can simply put the URL down at the bottom. They could create, a last slide that has kind of a works cited or a bibliography at the end. But they're really good at pulling pictures together, and they just turned out really well. I was really pleased with what they did, and again, without a lot of background basic information. Oh, so here's her other, let's see, yeah, I guess it zoomed back down into here. I'm going back and forth now. So here are some places to look for presentation assistance. This first one, again, this is a hyperlink in the PowerPoint, but if you Google the title, so if you Google Dynamic Presentations for Students and Teachers, it will take you to a Prezi. A colleague of mine designed and built it, Shondell Crumhauer, and then she and I gave this presentation at our state conference last year, but I thought rather than reinventing the wheel and creating another one, that then I would, give to you, we'd go back to the one that we did. So this is, again, it's just what it says. It's a way for students and teachers to make presentations. And then the second one is not just presentations. It goes beyond that, but if you, it's a little harder to find. I think this is also the Prezi link, but if you Google Powerful and Productive Technology Tools from MEA Fall 2012, you'll get to it. And then I also included the student's given me permission to show her Great Depression presentation. So if you go to this link, it would be the one that I had included, but it would give you the whole presentation. You could kind of scroll through to see what a sophomore did. I will say it's an honors class, and she's, particularly one of the two students, is driven and smarter than your average bear, so it's probably better than what most students would do, but at the same time, she didn't have a lot of time. They certainly didn't have a lot in class, and they didn't have a lot of introduction to Prezi, but this is what they created, so just to show you that it is possible. Any questions specific to multimedia presentation?
I don't have any here for the last portion yet.
Okay, and that's totally fine. So this is kind of just my thank you to all of you for participating, and Bedford St. Martin's for putting it on and inviting me to do the webinar. And then I'll leave this here. Feel free to email me or call me with any questions, and I'll put together some materials as well that I can email, with links and feedback, as well as I'm sure the resources that Lisa has that she'll provide.
Yes, and I am just going to unmute a few people.
Okay.
While you were talking, there was some suggestions for outside resources or articles or books that some people found helpful or useful. So,
excellent.
Mary, Chris Curtis, Ed Darling, and Kamel, I've unmuted all of you. If any of you want to share some of the suggestions, I guess I'll start with Kamel. The suggestion you offered about text complexity, if you'd like to share that with the rest of the group, you can jump in now. I don't know if he has audio or not. Doesn't look like it. Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I was saying that the table that she mentioned regarding the different levels of complexity and so on. I think I have the book. It's called Text Complexity, Raising Rigor in Reading. It's written by Douglas Fisher, Nancy Frey, and Diane Lapp, and it's published by Reading Association here in Washington.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to send that title, Text Complexity by Douglas Fisher, Nancy Frey, and Diane Lapp. I think I got that right. I'm going to send that to everyone here in the chat box, too. So thank you for that. Chris also had a suggestion for an article by Graff and Berkenstein. I don't know if you'd like to jump in, Chris, and offer that as well.
It's actually a book called They Say, I Say, The Moves That Matter in Academic Writing. Again, as you mentioned, by Graff and Berkenstein. One thing I liked about it is it does provide some templates for students to use in their writing and their thinking, and it really did help my students a lot with that idea of at least integrating the quotes smoothly so that they just didn't all of a sudden appear as evidence. So it was a good resource, and they actually have another edition that provides some arguments that you can use with the students before they write their own as sort of a mentor text piece.
Okay, thank you. And we also had Mary Vargas who offered another text resource. Mary, if you want to chime in with your suggestion. I don't know if she's here now. Mary had actually suggested a Bedford text. It was the language of composition, which is typically used for the AP language course. There's a chapter in there that develops the concepts involved in teaching argument. And Mary's messaged me that she's used it for years and she finds it very helpful. So I will say that on Mary's behalf. And then I'll loop back after Ed chimes in about the book on argumentative writing that he mentioned to me. So let me see if George is available. I'm sorry, Edward's available. Ed, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, George Hillocks has a book on argumentative writing. It's a new book. I think it's published by the publisher is escaping my memory at the moment. It's a good book, though. One thing it does is presents ways to get away from 5-paragraph essays.
Okay, great. Actually, someone just chimed in. They said they think it's a Heinemann resource. That's
it. That's it.
Teaching argumentative
Thank
writing.
you.
Great. Sure, absolutely. Thank you for your suggestions. I have actually, now that we started the resource suggestions, I have quite a few coming in. So to keep us as short as can be, I'll just share a few with you. For the Bedford resources that I mentioned earlier, we specialize, as you all know, in composition. So we have a whole series of informational text and nonfiction essay readers. If you want to preview any of them or see what any of them are all about, I'm going to send a link right now, and it will be to our Common Core website, and that will show you all of them. We have a book specifically for 9th and 10th grade Common Core called Common Threads that includes all of the nonfiction selections and help with teaching the expository, narrative, and argumentative essays. Your American historical documents are found in there. So we're really excited about that. That just came out about 4 or 5 weeks ago, so many of you may have copies and some of you may not. And then we also offer models for writers, patterns for college writing, and some other nonfiction readers that have short pieces with instructional apparatus around it to make it helpful for your students. And then all of our writing guides and handbooks are also available on that website. So I'll send that out shortly. And then I also will include the list of resources that I mentioned from Bedford and a list of links in our message that we send out as a thank you to you all. So if there's any other resources that anyone wants to share, feel free to send them to me. If anyone needs a copy of any of the Bedford resources, at least I can't get you copies of other resources, but if anyone would like a copy of any of the Bedford resources that you see on the Common Core website that I'm going to send out, please feel free to email me or message me, and I will make sure to get you those pieces. So I'll send that out right now to you, and the website is highschool.dswpub.com/Common Core. So you should have that now. And I don't see any other resource suggestions, so I just want to say thank you again to Kate for taking the time out to walk us through all of that. There's so much to know and so much for all of us to learn over the next year, and such great feedback that came from everyone, and everyone's at different levels of understanding with this thing, so it's great for us all to be able to get together and talk about it. And I appreciate all of the questions that came in and the suggestions. So keep your eyes peeled for my email for the archived recording and the list of links. And please do let me know if there's anything we can do to help you all out as you make the move to the Common Core standards in the next couple of months. So thank you again, Kate.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.